I'll be reading Psalms 129 and 131, which can be found on page 614 and 15 in your Pew Bible. Psalm 129. They have greatly oppressed me from my youth, let Israel say. They have greatly oppressed me from my youth, but they have not gained the victory over me. Plowmen have plowed my back and made their furrows long. But the Lord is righteous. He has cut me free from the cords of the wicked. May all who hate Zion be turned back in shame. May they be like grass on the roof, which withers before it can grow. With it the reaper cannot fill his hands, nor the one who gathers fill his arms. May those who pass by not say, "The blessing of the Lord be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Lord." In Psalm 131, my heart is not proud, O Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. But I have stilled and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Lord, put your hope in the Lord. O Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forevermore.
The choices of hymns that we sing is often intriguing to me, and it's actually known as the African American National Anthem that we just sang. And its place with these psalms is just perfect. So I hope you were paying attention to the words as you tried to sing a challenging hymn. Quite a few years ago, our youngest son and I set out on a hike to hike the Laurel Trail. Now, the Laurel Trail is a 70-mile trail in Pennsylvania. We set out to hike it in 1 week. It's not near as daunting as the 2,190-mile Appalachian Trail, which takes about 4 months. But we set out with great anticipation. There are shelters along the way, and we packed everything in backpacks, and we were going to go the whole way without anyone ever having to help us. About halfway through the 5th day, when the blister on the sole of my foot was about the size of an orange, and when he developed a fever, which, as near as we could ever figure out, was an allergic reaction to wool socks, we quit. We called a friend to come pick us up at a road that we were crossing, and sat there and waited. And that still disappoints me. To the degree that we actually talked about next summer trying again, when I'm a little older and probably wouldn't carry quite as heavy of a pack anymore. But it's probably not going to happen this summer. We've decided on another hike, which may be more challenging. But we're on the second to the last Sunday of this journey through the Psalms of Ascent. And I hope that as we've talked about Israel and their journey to Jerusalem, that they would take 3 times a year, and these Psalms would be the Psalms they would consider on the journey. I hope that as we've read them and talked about them and learned about them, that you might also be seeing them as Psalms for the journey of life. We set out with a destination, understanding that we've made a mess of things, calling on God, learning along the way to trust in God, to depend on God, and getting close to the end, looking toward Easter. As I remembered these Israelite pilgrims and thought about that hiking trip, I also thought about a little book called The Little Engine That Could. You know the book? Dolly Parton sends it out to everybody now. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I know I can, I know I can, I know I can. We're going to make it. We have 1 week to go. Psalm 129, however, doesn't begin like a lot of the others have. It doesn't begin by remembering God's faithfulness. It begins instead remembering the struggles and the injustices and the resistance that have been encountered. Greatly have they afflicted me from my youth. Let all Israel say, greatly have they afflicted me from my youth. Let all of you help me out. Say it with me. Greatly have they afflicted me from my youth. You can do better than that. Greatly have they afflicted me from my youth, but they have not prevailed. Now, I don't know what your afflictions have been. The psalmist says we've carried on to this point. We're going to make it. There's the possibility, I would say the probability, that there's another way even of translating that verse that says, but they have not prevailed, and that would be they have not been allowed to prevail. And that actually fits better, I think, with what we've been learning along the way. It is, we've been learning that it's by God's grace, it's by God's power, when we join God in the journey, that we're protected and that we can say we're going to make it, because it's not by our own. We struggle. We need help. We depend on God. It is by God's power that they have not prevailed against us. It's a recognition by David that it wasn't by his own power that he had carried on. This is a psalm of David. God is the source of their preservation and of ours. We experience God's sustaining presence as we trust God. Caused me to think of the first part of the Gospel of John. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness is not allowed. The darkness cannot overcome it. But how bad was it? As I said, I don't know what your struggles have been along the way. I can guess at some of them. I know some of mine. Some of you have been through the struggles of suddenly needing to go it alone without a spouse. Some of you have struggled with loss of children. Some of you have struggled with various other issues along the way. But I trust we're here because we can say, they have not been allowed to prevail against me. God has brought me to this point. And these travelers along the way, as they're sensing maybe they're coming toward the end, they're past halfway, they say, and we're going to make it. We're going to make it to the end. We're going to finish the journey. For us in our life journey, we're going to make it. Our faith is going to carry us to the end when we will see our Creator. But how bad has it been? I don't know if I've said this before. I think I have. In Hebrew, when you want to emphasize something, you just say it twice. So there's a place in the Old Testament where it says they fell into the pit. But what it actually says in Hebrew, it says they fell into the pit. It says it twice. When we translate it to English, we say they fell into the pit of pits. We do that sometimes in English. Well, how bad has it been? It says plowed, and furrows. And so the translation sometimes is the plowers plowed long furrow upon long furrow on our backs. It's the picture of a whipping. The whips have plowed the long furrows on their backs. But the Lord, the righteous judge, if you look at the next verse after that, has cut the cords. The picture is that they've been plowing us. They've been plowing furrows on our back. They've been destroying us. But God cut the cords that attached the plow to the enemy. And the enemy can go marching on for all they want and think they're doing something, but they're not going to continue to destroy me because my faith is in God, and God has carried me through. There was a 16th century French reformer. I don't know if he was part of the Anabaptist movement or not, but it feels like he would have been because the time is right and the words are right. He said to King Henry, Sire, it is the lot of the church of God to endure blows and not to inflict them. In other words, we'll put up with what you want to try and put up against us, and we won't retaliate against you. It's the lot of the church of God to endure blows and not to inflict them. But he goes on, may it please you, King, to remember the church is an anvil, and it has worn out many hammers. What's the picture? The church has continued through the ages. Israel was resisted along the way so many times, but God carried them through. And then Jesus came and established the church, and from the beginning, there's resistance to the church, even by the Jewish community and then by the Roman community. But the church continues. The church endures. There are 1/3 of the people of the world who claim connection to Christ. Last statistic I saw, 30% of the world, if you ask them, would say, we believe in Christ. We're Christian. Now, I said in Sunday school, some of us aren't sure that all of them who claim to be Christians really know what they're talking about, and that's not what the survey was about. The survey was about who claims Christ. 1/3 of the world. Satan has not been able to stop it. In comparison, we think of the evil of Hitler. He ruled for 12 years. He was popular for 25. We're talking about 1/3 of the world in 2,000 years that the church has prevailed and carried through. So the writer of this psalm, David, says that God has cut off the plow from the people who want to destroy it. The power of it is gone. We trust in God. We know God is faithful. I have said sometimes that I create my own translations. And this psalm talks about, let me see, I have it here somewhere. It talks about, may they be turned back. Plowers have plowed my back. The Lord is righteous. He has cut the cords. May all who hate Zion be put to shame and turned backwards. The psalmist has 3 wishes for the people who resist. And the first one is that they be turned backwards. But I was looking at this and reading into it, and again, it has that kind of double Hebrew in it. May they be, this is my translation, sorry about it. They may be shamefully put back on their backsides. This is the picture I got. They're pulling the plow, and they hear behind them something, and they turn around, and it's God, and he's cutting the cords between them and the plow. And you know when you're pulling hard, like in tug of war, and they cut the rope, and they look back, and they just fall over on their backside. He says, may they be frustrated by God. It's God's job. God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And we leave it to God. But the psalmist says, I've seen it. God turns it back against them. We're going to make it. We're in good hands. His second wish is that they would be like grass on the housetops. And it's interesting, he kind of carries on. If you're plowing, what are you plowing for? You're getting ready to plant a crop. He says, may the crop that they plant be like the crops that get planted on our housetops. Now, we don't have housetops that grow crops, and they didn't either. What would happen is the dirt would blow up there until there was enough dirt, and then the seeds would grow up there, and they would start to sprout. But they wouldn't grow. It wasn't deep enough. They would die. And if they did get big enough, they'd go up there and cut them down. They weren't crops that they were going to harvest. May what our enemies of the church plant be like those plants and never come to harvest. I pictured the houses that I've seen where the dirt has filled the rain gutter and the maple trees are growing. May they be like those maple trees. May they never grow up. Those trees will never get rooted enough in your spouting. I mean, it's good if you go up and clear them out, but may it be like those. They'll never become a tree. That's his second wish. The first one, may they just fall down. Second one, may their crops not come to fruition. And the third one, I said it this way, may no one confuse their work with the work of God. That's probably a more real wish than we think of. The example would be Saul, who at one point thought he was doing the work of God when he was trying to kill the followers of Jesus. There are times when people are being destructive of the work of God who may think they're doing the work of God. And he says, may that never be. May no one encourage the work of those who are working against our journey. So those are his three wishes. But the central phrase in this psalm is, the Lord is righteous. We will make it. We are a stubborn people, us Christians. Stubborn in that we don't turn our back on the call of God. Because we know, our travels have shown us, God is faithful. The cords of the plows are cut and the church will go on. But then we have to pause. That's Psalm 129. And we have learned, and we need to learn again, that not all resistance to our journey comes from outside of ourselves. I've already indicated that there are times when the resistance to the journey can feel like it comes from within. That it takes various forms. Churches sometimes resist churches, unfortunately. Believers in the same church can sometimes become stumbling blocks for other believers. But even beyond that, we can become our own worst enemy. We can get in our own way. Psalm 130, out of the depths I cry, Lord, have mercy. What I think's happening is the travelers, and I can feel it in my own life sometimes, the travelers are past the center, they're seeing the end coming, they're thinking we're going to get to Jerusalem, we're going to go to the temple, we're going to worship, we're going to have... Wait a minute. Am I really worthy to enter the presence of God? Have I come all this way and then I look at myself and I say, dare I really enter the presence of God? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but how many of you ever at points think about the end of your life and wonder, am I really going to be good enough to get in heaven? If you'd raised your hands and said yes, the only people who wouldn't have raised their hands are liars. Okay? So this is very real on this journey. Am I going to be worthy? And the cry is the same cry that it always has to be. Lord, have mercy. One person said this psalm is an eye specialist, not a painter. A painter shows us what they see. An eye specialist helps us to see. It shows us something about ourselves. And the depths are the result of God having put eternity in our souls. And yet, who am I? Eugene Peterson says of this psalm, it's a psalm about suffering and pain plus. Physical and emotional pain plus the awareness of who we are. And the worry that maybe who we are will threaten our destiny. Will it finally be worth the trip? Or will we finally be nothing? Will all of our work be discarded? All of our attempts to follow and be good, will they really live up to it? Or are we going to be rejected in the universe and thrown into the garbage dump of humanity? Our bodies do degenerate, we know that. Our emotions malfunction, we know that. Our minds become confused, we know that. Our families find fault with us, yes, we know that. Our society avoids us and wants to push us aside. Yes, any combination of those can put us in the depths. And out of the depths I cry, Lord, have mercy. That word, have mercy. In Hebrew, you may have heard this, the word is chesed. Of course, Hebrew is not written with English letters, but C-H-E-S-E-D, chesed. They tell us, the translators, that there's no English word that captures that one. It's too big. It means mercy. It means loving kindness. It means giving us better than we deserve. The psalmist says, "Oh Lord, show me chesed. Receive me." I realize as I think of walking into the temple into Jerusalem, there's no way. I mean, even along this trip, I've gotten discouraged and asked, "Are you really with me?" and complained. Oh, I've complained on the trip, just like Israel complained their 40 years in the wilderness. I'm not worthy. Oh, Lord, show mercy. And God does. And so we come to Psalm 131. We've cried out for mercy. We wait and hope. We are dependent on God's unfailing love, mercy, kindness, all of that wrapped up in that word. We've discovered again that we are dependent on God. It's not that we can ever accomplish it, but we confess our sin and call for mercy and we receive it. And as I said a week ago, if we've received God's mercy, if God has been merciful to us, who can bring an accusation against us? Neither life, nor death, nor angels, nor principality, nor things present, nor things to come, nor anything that has ever been created can separate us from the love of God. And the travelers and we hear that again. And we take a deep breath and we say, I'm okay. No matter what all goes wrong, no matter how my body disintegrates, no matter what my mind does to me, God has said, I'm okay. And so in Psalm 131, with humble courage, I always like that phrase, with humble courage. The courage that knows that God is on our side and the humility that knows that's the only way we can make it. With humble courage, with gentle confidence that comes from a deep trust in God, we are calmed and quieted like a weaned child. Now, what do you know about a weaned child? Eugene Peterson says this is a psalm that teaches us or prunes us away from unruly ambition and from infantile dependence. Infantile dependence. So think about an unweaned child. An unweaned child is supremely self-centered. I'm sure you've heard people comment on all the things that children teach their parents. An unweaned child will teach us how self-centered we are. And in fact, when I hear those tragic stories of a parent who has turned abusive toward a crying child, I know that that's a parent who has not learned to set themselves aside. They still put themselves at the center of their universe, and this crying child is just an interruption, and they run out of patience. A newborn teaches parents that the parent is not the center of the universe. A parent who abuses an infant is a person who can't accept that someone else has the right to demand something they're not ready to give. Now, babies cry, right? They cry when they're wet. They cry when they're hungry. They cry when they're insecure. They cry when they're lonely. And sometimes they cry for what nobody can figure out why. Are you like that as a Christian? You cry out to God for every little thing and you expect it to be answered right now. Hold me, feed me, cuddle me, rock me, change me. Do something. But when we've learned that God is there and God is patient and God is waiting for the whole world to change and not everything that goes wrong in my life is my fault, we can walk like a weaned child on this journey. Like a weaned child, I've learned to trust in God. The weaned child no longer sees its mother as simply a means to satisfy its needs, and it learns to love mother for mother. And we learn to love God for God, not just for what gets done for us immediately. We don't end up blaming God for everything that happens. The world, when something goes wrong, the world wants to say, how can a loving God? And they never ask about what humans had to do with it. And you know, a lot of our struggles, we learn this as we grow as Christians, a lot of our struggles aren't something that we necessarily caused. It's the problem. Job's friends, when Job started to suffer, the first thing his friends tried to do is say, Job, what did you do to cause this? Right? And they, in the end, are bad friends. We suffer from things out of despair. We cry to God for things that weren't our fault. And God says, wait, or later, or be patient. And as we've grown, we are able to do that and take that deep breath like a weaned child and delay gratification and wait for lunch for 2 hours or whatever it's going to be. And these travelers have gotten there. And this is actually one of my favorite of the Psalms of Ascent. Like a weaned child, I am content. I have quieted myself. Paul talks about this to the Corinthians. The writer of the Hebrews talks about it when they say, we wanted to give you spiritual food, but you were only ready for milk. You still haven't grown to that point. This is what Paul says, brothers and sisters, I could not address you as people who live by the Spirit, but as people who are still worldly, mere infants in Christ. I gave you milk, not solid food, for you were not ready for it. Indeed, you're still not ready. You're still worldly. For since there is jealousy and quarreling among you, are you not worldly? You haven't learned to rest and wait? Are you not acting like mere humans? For when one says, I follow Paul, or another, I follow Apollos, are you not being mere humans? We've been on this Christian pilgrimage enough time to know that we can trust God. And so this psalm says, we've calmed ourselves, quieted ourselves. Well, that's infantile dependence. On the other side, our culture also doesn't recognize unruly ambition. A child who has calmed and quieted itself won't take everything into their own hands, which seems to happen more at junior high level than at the infantile level, but I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to do it my way. Our culture seems to no longer recognize unruly ambition also as being at the root of sin. It says, get it while you can. Reach for all the gusto. Ask your doctor for a pill to fix it now. They tell you which pills to ask them for on TV all the time. Run faster, jump higher, live longer, and if people get in your way, pass them, push them aside. Unfortunately, sometimes injure them or kill them in the process. My friend in the banking business, this was pre-2008. In 2008, of course, they're talking now about the crash of 2008 and whether we're going through that again. Previous 2008, he's president of the bank, and he's telling me what's going on in the financial world. And he said, you know, it's all the result of one problem. I said, what's that? He said, greed. Greed at all levels. He said there are people who wanted cheap housing, and there are people who wanted to get it when they shouldn't have, and there were people who wanted to get their interest money and make their money, and it's all built on greed. A weaned Christian has learned that when God says no, or wait, or not now, God isn't leaving us. God isn't rejecting us. God is just growing us. You have what you need for now. God says, I've got your future in hand. And we take a deep breath, on our journey and we say, we'll be okay. It doesn't mean we deny the feelings. Doesn't mean that we claim everything is perfect when it isn't. Doesn't mean that we never speak out against injustice. But it means we know who's got control and the end is okay. Paul tells us in Romans, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. That's a weaned child response. Philippians 4 says that when we humble ourselves like Jesus did, Philippians 2, Jesus gave up heaven, humbled himself, became human. Philippians 4 then talks about us learning to follow that, and it says, the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. You'll be okay. And we will learn to be content, whatever our circumstances. Those are Paul's words to the Philippians in chapter 4.